She was 5 years old, barefoot in the snow, and bleeding from both knees when she pushed open the door of the Last Mile Diner at 11:43 on a Tuesday night in November. No one moved. 8 leather-clad men, road-scarred and stone-faced, stared at the child standing in the doorway like she had fallen from another world. She wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming, she just stood there in a threadbare nightgown, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one button eye missing, and looked straight across the room at the biggest, most dangerous-looking man in the building. Then she walked to him. Not to the waitress, not to the trucker by the window. To him. To Deacon Vale. And she said 5 words that changed everything. "They're taking the other children." Outside, through the fogged diner windows, a black SUV rolled slowly past beneath a broken neon sign, its engine barely a whisper against the dark. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because this channel is where every story hits different. Stories like this one don't come around every day, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Drop a like if this already has your heart pounding, and leave a comment below telling me what city and country you're watching from tonight. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to that diner. The Last Mile Diner had no business still being open. It sat at the edge of Route 9 like something the highway had tried to forget. Paint peeling off the siding in long strips. The parking lot cracked and frost heaved. The sign above the door buzzing with a short in its wiring that nobody had fixed in 3 winters. The coffee was terrible. The pie was worse. But it was warm, and it was open past midnight. And on the second Tuesday of every month, it was where the Iron Wardens MC held their informal chapter sit-down before the weather got bad enough to shut down the mountain roads for good. 8 bikes sat in the lot. 8 men sat inside. The booths had been pushed together in the far corner near the emergency exit. A habit, not a coincidence. Men who had spent years in hostile terrain didn't sit with their backs to doors. Deacon Vale occupied the chair at the head of the arrangement. 41 years old, 16 years out of the army. President of the Iron Wardens for the last 9. He was not a large man in the way that intimidated immediately. He was the other kind of large, the kind that settled into a room like weather moving in, slow and inevitable and total. His face carried a scar that ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to the edge of his jaw, an old burn from Kandahar that he never explained to anyone who hadn't already earned the right to ask. He wore his hair short, his beard longer than it had been in summer, and his cuts, the leather vest that bore the Iron Warden's patch, like a second skin he had grown into over decades rather than years. He was in the middle of saying something about the chapter's overdue heating fund when the diner door opened. Cold air came in first, then the child. Nobody spoke. Deacon didn't speak. The girl stood in the doorway with her arms pressed to her sides, her chin raised in a way that looked less like bravery and more like the specific posture a person develops when they have already decided that fear is a luxury they cannot afford. She was small, maybe 4.5 feet, maybe less. Her feet were bare against the linoleum. One side of her nightgown had a dark stain on it that in the overhead fluorescent light looked very much like blood. In her left hand she held a stuffed rabbit, the fabric worn smooth, one of its plastic button eyes missing. She looked around the room once, took in the waitress frozen near the coffee station, hand still on the pot, took in the trucker 2 stools down from the counter, fork halfway to his mouth, took in the 8 men in leather in the corner booth, and then her eyes settled on Deacon Vale and did not move. She crossed the diner floor without hesitation. Deacon did not reach for her. He did not move at all. He let her come. Let her stop 2 feet from him. Let her stand there in the particular silence that falls when something terrible has just walked in through the front door wearing the face of a child. "They're taking the other children," she said. Her voice was even, not calm. Tss. There's a difference. Even the way a person who has been running for a long time eventually runs, the shakiness burned away to nothing, leaving only forward motion. Deacon looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the man to his right, Priest, the club's road captain, 45 years old, 2 tours of Iraq, currently expressionless in the specific way that meant he was thinking very hard and very fast. Priest gave the smallest possible nod. "Sit down," Deacon said to the girl. Not gentle exactly, not hard, just present. "What's your name?" "Lily," she said. "Lily Carter." How old are you, Lily Carter? 5. She paused. Almost 6. Okay. Deacon pulled out the chair beside him. Sit down and tell me from the beginning. Her name was Lily Carter, and she had been missing for 11 days. Not that she knew that. She had lost track somewhere around day 4, when the place she was being kept stopped having any windows she could see light through. She knew it had been a long time. She knew her mother would be looking. She had told herself that every night, quietly, the way children tell themselves things that must be true because the alternative is not survivable. She told it to Deacon simply and in order, the way a child recounts a nightmare. Not because she was unbothered, but because she had rehearsed this, alone in the dark, knowing that if she ever got out, she would need someone to believe her quickly. There was a van. There was a rest stop off the highway where her mother had pulled over because Lily had needed to use the bathroom. There was a man who had seemed helpful. And then there was a blindfold and a long drive in a warehouse that smelled like diesel and damp concrete, and she was not the only one there. That last part landed in the room like something physical. How many? This from Priest, who had leaned forward with his elbows on the table. Lily thought about it carefully. I counted 22, but there might have been more in the other part. I couldn't always get to the door. Deacon felt something happen behind his sternum. Not sentiment, not yet. Something more structural. The particular interior shift of a man who has just been assigned a mission he did not ask for and already knows he cannot refuse. He had felt it before. The first time in a village outside Kandahar, when a kid barely older than Lily had pointed at a building and said something in Dari that his interpreter had translated as "they're still inside." He had felt it then. He felt it now. Draw it for me, he said. Lily blinked. What? The place. The inside, whatever you remember. The waitress, a woman named Terry, who had worked this diner for 11 years and had seen things in that time, but nothing like this, brought a paper placemat and a box of crayons from behind the counter without being asked. She set them in front of Lily and then stepped back and pressed herself against the far wall with her arms folded and her mouth tight. Lily picked up a brown crayon and began to draw. She drew with the precise focus of a child who has spent 11 days memorizing everything around her because her instincts told her the details might matter. She drew rooms, she drew doors, she drew what appeared to be a loading area at the back. She drew the location of guards as best she could estimate them. She drew a window she had found in the utility room that was small, but not too small. The one she had gotten through, the one that had cost her the skin on both knees and one palm. She drew the tree line beyond the fence. She drew a road she had followed by moonlight for what felt like 2 hours before the diner lights appeared in the distance. While she drew, the men around the table were having a different conversation entirely, conducted in the shorthand of people who have worked together long enough that full sentences are sometimes redundant. Priest looked at Deacon. How far? Deacon looked at the map Lily was building, the crayon roads and crayon fences, and careful crayon X's marking the guards' positions. He thought about the mountain roads above Route 9. The abandoned logging operations that had shut down when the mill closed in 2019. The access roads that didn't appear on civilian GPS maps because they predated the satellite era. Far enough that nobody would look there first, his expression answered. Gavel, the warden's sergeant-at-arms, a former Marine whose legal name was Anthony Marsh, but who had not been called that in 15 years, was already on his phone, thumbs moving. There's a structure up Harlan Ridge Road, he said without looking up. Old timber processing facility. Sold twice in 4 years, current ownership is a shell company registered in Delaware. Hasn't been on any inspection circuit since 2021. The table went quiet. Outside, a vehicle moved slowly through the lot. Not stopping. Not fast. Just present in the way that means someone is making sure of something. Deacon did not look at the window. He looked at Lily. She had stopped drawing. She was looking at the window. Is that one of theirs? He asked, his voice absolutely even. She nodded once, small and certain. The Iron Wardens were not, by any objective measure, the kind of organization that should have been trusted with something like this. There were 8 of them. Their criminal records between them included 4 assault charges, 2 weapons violations, 1 federal tax issue that had taken 3 years and a very particular lawyer to resolve, and a long institutional memory from law enforcement in 2 counties that had never entirely disappeared regardless of how clean they had kept themselves in recent years. They were loud. They were visible. They occupied a specific space in the social imagination that made people clutch their purses when 8 Harleys rolled into a gas station in formation. They were also, and this was the part that rarely made it into the stories people told about men like them, 8 veterans between whom they held 6 Purple Hearts, 4 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star that Deacon had never once mentioned in mixed company, and a collective 1,000+ days in active combat across 3 theaters of war. They had training in things that were not useful at dinner parties, but were extremely useful in situations that involved hostile actors, uncertain terrain, and human lives in immediate jeopardy. Deacon had left the Army because the Army had eventually been unable to give him a reason to stay that outweighed the reasons to go. He had found the Iron Wardens the way most men like him found things, sideways, through necessity, through the particular gravity that pulls damaged people toward one another until they form something that functions, however roughly, like a family. He had never imagined the club would be what it became. He had never imagined that being an outlaw in appearance would eventually mean being a guardian in practice. But here was the thing about the Iron Wardens that mattered tonight. They were disciplined. They had been in rooms where the temperature was 11 below, and the nearest support was 40 miles out, and the order of operations had to be right the first time, because there was no second time. They knew how to be quiet. They knew how to be patient. They knew how to do the thing that had to be done without the noise that made things worse. "I need to make a call," Priest said. "Who?" Deacon asked. "County Dispatch. Anonymous tip. We put them on the road." He paused. "But they won't get there first." "No," Deacon agreed. "They won't." This was not a decision made lightly. Deacon understood exactly what it meant to move toward a situation like this without badge or authority. The legal exposure, the possibility of things going wrong in ways that couldn't be undone, the certainty that whatever happened next would be examined closely by people who were already inclined to read the worst version of their intentions. He understood all of it. He looked at the crayon map on the placemat. He looked at the child who had drawn it. He thought about the 22 other children, at minimum, who were in a building up a mountain road right now and who did not have a window they had found in a utility room. "Gear up," he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The men moved. Lily watched them prepare with the particular intensity of a child who has survived 11 days by paying very close attention to everything. She watched Gavel retrieve a kit bag from behind the rear bench seat of his bike. She could see him through the diner window, moving efficiently in the cold, breath-fogging in the yellow light from the parking lot lamp. She watched 2 other men, she would learn later they were called Hutch and Wire, conferring over a topographical map that Priest had produced from somewhere. She watched Deacon stand at the window for a long moment, looking out at the road, very still, the way a man gets still when he is running calculations in his head that he cannot afford to get wrong. The waitress brought Lily a mug of hot chocolate. Lily wrapped both hands around it and said nothing. Terry sat down across from her. She was maybe 50, with kind lines around her eyes, and the look of a woman who had been through enough that she had stopped being surprised by things and started just moving toward whatever needed doing. "You doing okay?" she asked. "I told them everything I know," Lily said. "I know you did." Terry reached across the table and put her hand over Lily's briefly. "You did good." Lily looked at the window again, at Deacon, still standing there. "He's going to go get them," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Terry said. "How do you know?" Terry looked at Deacon through the glass, at the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of his stillness. "Because he came back the last time too," she said quietly. "When everyone said he wouldn't." Lily thought about that. She looked down at the stuffed rabbit in her lap, the one she had named Milo 3 Christmases ago when it had been new and both-eyed and her whole life had been ordinary. She pressed her thumb into the place where the missing eye had been. "There's something else," she said. Terry looked at her. "I saw them loading boxes into a truck, tonight, before I got out." Her voice was steady in that frightening way again, the way that was not calm but was beyond calm. "They were talking about a schedule, moving time. One of them said before 4 a.m. or it doesn't happen." Terry was already on her feet. Deacon heard it through the diner window. Or rather, he heard Terry knock on the glass and motion him back inside. And then he heard Lily say before 4 a.m. in that same flat, exhausted, absolutely certain voice, and he felt the calculation in his head shift like a gear engaging. They had, at best, 3 hours. Change of plan, he said. He did not explain it twice. He didn't need to. The men around him absorbed the information and adjusted in the way that men absorb and adjust when time has compressed and there is no space left for anything but the task. Priest was already on the phone. The anonymous tip, the mountain road, the structure at Harlan Ridge, 3 hours and counting. Gavel was checking his watch. Hutch had the bikes starting, the engines rumbling awake one by one in the cold parking lot, each one a sound that was simultaneously mechanical and alive, something between a heartbeat and a warning. Deacon went back to Lily. She looked up at him from the booth. Milo the rabbit in her lap. The crayon map still on the table between them. "You're going to stay here," he said. "Terry's going to stay with you. There are going to be people coming. Police, eventually. When they come, you tell them what you told me. All of it. You understand?" "Are you going to bring them home?" she asked. "Not can you, not will you, are you? Present tense, already occurring." Deacon Vale, who had not made a promise he was uncertain about keeping since the last time it had cost him something he couldn't get back, looked at the child in front of him. "Yes," he said. He put his hand on the table next to hers. Not on it, next to it, close enough to feel the warmth. And then he stood up and walked toward the door. Outside, Bati, Mosoka, outside, 8. Harley engines were already running beneath a broken neon sign, their exhaust clouding white in the November cold, their headlights cutting the dark of Route 9 in 8 parallel lines pointing toward the mountain. Deacon settled onto his bike. The cold hit his face immediately, sharp as a slap, the kind of cold that strips pretense and leaves only what's real. Around him, the brothers fell into formation without instruction. 8 men, 8 machines, 8 histories of damage and survival, moving together toward a logging road that didn't appear on civilian maps, toward a building where 24 frightened children were waiting to be loaded into a truck before 4 in the morning. He pulled out of the lot. The others followed. The diner's broken neon sign buzzed and flickered behind them. And through the window, 5-year-old Lily Carter watched them go, until the last taillight disappeared around the bend in the mountain road and the dark swallowed them whole. She picked up the brown crayon. On the back of the placemat, she began to draw something new. Not a map this time, but it wasn't until Terry leaned over to look that either of them noticed what Lily had drawn in the corner of the original map, the details she hadn't mentioned out loud, the things she had recorded quietly and automatically because 11 days in the dark had taught her to record everything. A face, a man's face. And beneath it, in the uncertain handwriting of an almost 6-year-old, 4 letters, CHIEF. Terry stared at the drawing for a long moment. Then she looked toward the road where the bikes had disappeared. And then she looked at the diner's landline on the wall behind the counter, and the thing she was thinking moved across her face like a shadow. Because Chief was what people in this county called the director of the local sheriff's department's Special Investigations Unit. And if Lily Carter had seen that face inside the warehouse, then someone had just sent 8 men up a mountain road toward a trap. Terry did not touch the phone. Not immediately. She stood with her hand 6 inches from the receiver and made herself think it through the way you had to think things through when the wrong move could kill someone you couldn't afford to lose. The diner was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigeration units behind the counter and the sound of Lily's crayon moving across the back of the placemat in slow, deliberate strokes. Outside, the road was empty. The last taillight from Deacon's bike had vanished around the bend 2 minutes ago, maybe 3, and the night had settled back in behind them like water closing over a stone. She looked at the drawing again. The face Lily had sketched in the corner of the crayon map, not cartoonish, not vague, but specific in the way a child's drawing gets specific when the child is afraid of forgetting. Heavy brow, square jaw, a scar through one eyebrow that she had rendered in careful brown crayon lines. And beneath it, CHIEF. Terry had lived in this county for 31 years. She had known Harold Kane, chief of the Special Investigations Unit, County Sheriff's Department, for 20 of them. She had poured his coffee. She had watched him shake hands with city councilmen at the 4th of July parade. She had watched him stand in front of news cameras after the Millhaven drug bust 3 years ago and talk about the duty of law enforcement to protect the vulnerable. She pulled her hand back from the phone. "Lily," she said carefully, "this face you drew, did you see this person inside the building where you were?" Lily did not look up from her drawing. He came twice. He wore regular clothes, not like the other men. The first time he talked to the man who was in charge. The second time he brought papers in a folder and they argued for a long time. She paused, pressed the crayon harder. He saw me watching. He looked right at me. Did he do anything? Did he say anything to you? No. Another pause. But he knew I was there. He knew what the place was. You could tell. Terry looked at the phone. Then she looked at the clock above the counter. 11:58. They had less than 4 hours. Deacon and the others were already on the mountain road, moving toward a location that someone with a badge and a folder full of papers had visited twice. She picked up her cell phone instead of the diner landline. Different thing entirely. She scrolled to a number she had not called in 2 years and pressed dial. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice, sleep rough and immediately alert in the way that meant she was used to being woken by calls like this. Terry. May. Terry turned away from Lily and lowered her voice. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not ask me how I know what I'm about to tell you. A beat of silence on the other end. May Colton was a federal investigator who had grown up 3 blocks from Terry in the same neighborhood and had spent 20 years going as far in the opposite direction from that neighborhood as education and will and a particular brand of stubbornness would take her. She owed Terry nothing professionally. She owed her considerably in the human way. Talk, May said. The mountain road was exactly what Lily's memory had described. A rutted logging trail that had been adequate for heavy equipment in the 1990s and had since been left to 3 decades of frost heave and neglect. Deacon's headlight found potholes the size of serving platters, fallen branches that had been pushed to the shoulder recently enough to leave fresh scrape marks in the mud, tire tracks overlapping tire tracks in the soft earth where the road curved toward the ridge. He noted the tire tracks. He noted the freshness of the broken branches. He said nothing because the men behind him were noting the same things. They cut the engines a half-mile from the coordinates Gavel had pulled from the property records. Sound traveled different in mountain cold, cleaner and farther, and they did not have the option of announcing themselves. 8 men pushed their bikes off the road into the tree line, stood them up on their kickstands, and moved the rest of the distance on foot through 3 inches of frozen ground cover that crunched faintly with every step and could not be helped. Priest moved up beside Deacon. He had a pair of thermal binoculars around his neck, the kind that had not come from any civilian sporting goods store, and he raised them when they reached the tree line above the facility. The building resolved in green and white against the cold dark. It was larger than Lily's crayon map had suggested, or rather, the crayon map had been accurate, but scale was different in person. A main structure that had once been a timber processing shed, converted and expanded, with a secondary building connected by a covered walkway. 2 vehicles in the lot, a panel van and a pickup truck. And at the corners, the positions Lily had marked with her careful X's, figures moving in slow patrol patterns, their body heat blooming white in the thermal image. 4 on the exterior, Priest said quietly. 2 at the main entrance, 1 at the southeast corner, 1 walking the perimeter. Loading dock? Deacon asked. Priest shifted the binoculars. 1 vehicle backed up to it, not the van we see from here. A second one, far side of the building. Engine's been running a while. You can see the heat off the exhaust. He lowered the binoculars and looked at Deacon. They're already loading. The word already compressed the timeline in a way that changed everything. Deacon looked at his watch. 12:17. Not 4 a.m. Already loading at 12:17. Lily said before 4, Hutch said from behind them. His voice was barely above a breath. Lily said that's what she heard, Deacon said. She heard the schedule. She didn't hear if it changed. He looked at the building. Thought for 2 seconds. We need the dock. Gavel touched his arm. We split. We're 4 and 4. I know what we are. And if there are more inside than we're counting, I know. Deacon turned to look at him. Gavel was 43, had a plate in his left shoulder from a roadside device outside Mosul, had 3 kids in middle school, and had never once in 9 years as the club's sergeant-at-arms made a decision based on anything except what was correct. He was looking at Deacon now with the expression that meant he was not arguing. He was ensuring that Deacon was seeing clearly. I know, Deacon said again, quieter. We take the dock first. We get the vehicle stopped. Then we move on the main structure. Law enforcement ETA?
Wire asked.
Priest made the call. They're coming. Deacon looked at the building again. They won't be here in time to stop that truck. Nobody argued. Nobody looked happy. They moved. The split went Deacon, Priest, Gavel, and a man named Rook toward the loading dock. Rook was the youngest of them at 34, a former ranger with a bad knee and extraordinary instincts under pressure. The other four, Hutch, Wire, and two men named Cross and Saber, took the long way around the fence line to position themselves near the secondary entrance on the building's east side. They had done worse with less. That was not comfort, exactly, but it was something. The loading dock was exactly where Lily's map had placed it, which meant that whatever else was uncertain tonight, the child's memory was not among the uncertain things. The truck was a commercial panel vehicle, dark blue, license plates that Deacon noted automatically, a habit that never left, rear doors standing open. Two men moving boxes from the dock to the truck's interior. The boxes were wrong in a way that made Deacon's jaw tighten. The size of them, the configuration, the particular carefulness with which they were being handled. Not boxes. Containers. Modified. The kind that required ventilation panels along the sides. He looked at Priest. Priest had seen it too. The muscle in his jaw moved once. They came out of the shadows in the particular way that men with that kind of training emerged from darkness. Not running, not announcing, just suddenly present in the space where they hadn't been a moment before, which was somehow more frightening than noise would have been. The two men at the truck turned. One of them dropped what he was carrying. The other started to reach for something at his hip. "Don't," Deacon said. His voice was the same temperature as the air around them, not raised, not theatrical. Just a single word delivered with the absolute conviction of a man who meant it completely and had the capacity to back it up and wanted very much to not have to. The hand stopped moving. "On the ground," Priest said. "Both of you, right now." They went down. Gavel secured them with zip ties from the kit bag. Practical, quiet, efficient. Rook went to the truck, put his hand on the nearest container, and stood there for a moment with his forehead nearly touching the metal panel. Then he straightened. "Kids," he said, just the one word. The way he said it made the dock go completely still. "Alive?" Deacon asked. "Alive." Rook's voice had something in it that he was working to keep controlled. "Scared, little ones." He put his hand flat against the container again, a gesture that had no tactical purpose whatsoever and everything human. "We need to get this open." "Not yet." Deacon looked at the dock door behind them. It was ajar, light leaking through the gap. "We open it now. They hear us inside." "Deacon, 3 more minutes, Rook." He met the younger man's eyes. 3 minutes and those kids come home. You push now and we lose the ones inside. Rook's jaw worked. He stepped back from the container. He understood. He didn't have to like it. The interior of the building was a different world entirely from the frozen quiet outside. Fluorescent lights, the industrial kind that buzzed at a frequency that pressed against the inside of your skull. A smell compounded of diesel and chemical cleaning product, and below that something organic and miserable that Deacon identified immediately and did not name, because naming it meant letting it in, and he could not afford that yet. The main floor was a large open space, the original processing floor, repurposed, with temporary partitions creating rooms that had no business being called rooms. A folding table with monitors and radios. A man behind it who looked up when the 4 of them came through the dock door and had exactly enough time to reach for his radio before Gavel put a hand on the table and bent the radio's antenna at a right angle without breaking eye contact with him. "We're going to do this quietly," Deacon said. The man behind the table was approximately 50, heavy-set, wearing a flannel shirt and an expression that was cycling rapidly through options and finding none of them viable. He looked at the 4 men in leather in front of him and made the correct assessment of his situation. "What do you want?" he said. Flat. Not a question. "Where are the children?" A hesitation that lasted exactly long enough to make Deacon's assessment of this man crystallize into certainty. "I don't know what—" "The children," Deacon said. "Every second you spend making me repeat myself is a second I become less patient. You don't want to be in this room when my patience runs out." The man looked at him for a long moment. Whatever he saw there apparently resolved the question for him. He pointed toward the partition wall at the far end of the floor. They were in two rooms separated by a plywood partition. 24 children ranging from approximately 3 years old to perhaps 12, sitting on foam sleeping pads in a space that smelled of fear and unwashed clothing, and the particular staleness of air that too many people have been breathing in too small a space for too many days. They had blankets. They had water bottles. This had apparently been considered adequate. When the door opened, the youngest ones flinched back. The older ones went very still in the way children go still when they have learned that stillness is safer than reaction. One girl near the back, maybe 9 or 10, had positioned herself between the door and the smaller children behind her, in a posture that broke something in Deacon's chest quietly and completely, because he recognized it. The same instinct that had put him in front of people who couldn't protect themselves since he was 19 years old. "My name is Deacon," he said from the doorway. He stayed in the doorway, didn't step inside, gave them the space. "Nobody here is going to hurt you. We're getting you out." He looked directly at the oldest girl. "What's your name?" She stared at him. Leather vest, scarred face, 8 large men in the building, sounds of movement from the main floor. Everything her experience of the last however many days had taught her said to not trust this. But she was also 10 years old, and she had been protecting smaller children for long enough that she recognized something in his posture. The way he stayed in the doorway, the way he was not looking at the children the way the other men had looked at them. "Sophie," she said finally. "Sophie, good. I need you to help me. Can you do that?" A pause. Then, "Yes. I need you to tell me if there's anyone else in this building I don't know about. Any adults who brought you here, any other kids I haven't found yet." Sophie looked at him steadily. "There were 3 more," she said. "They took them yesterday. I don't know where." The words settled into the room and stayed there. 3 more. Already moved. Yesterday. Hutch's voice came through the earpiece Deacon wore. A simple consumer unit. Nothing sophisticated, but sufficient. "Deacon, we've got a problem on the east side." He stepped back into the main floor, lowered his voice. "Talk. There's a vehicle we didn't clock from the ridge. It's been sitting dark in the trees about 200 meters east of the fence. Engine off. No heat signature on the thermals." "How long?" "Wire thinks it was there when we came in. We just couldn't see it from our approach angle." Deacon absorbed this. A vehicle with the engine off meant it had been there long enough to cool down. Long enough that whoever was in it had arrived before the Iron Wardens, which meant they had been watching the building, not responding to it. Which meant either law enforcement had a separate operation running that they hadn't been told about, or something else entirely. "Plates?" he asked. "Too dark, but—" Hutch paused. The quality of that pause communicated more than the words that followed. "Wire thinks he recognizes the vehicle. He says it's the same model and color as a county fleet unit." County, fleet. Deacon stood in the middle of the floor of a warehouse full of children and thought about a crayon drawing on the back of a paper placemat and 4 letters in a child's careful handwriting. "Pull back from it," he said. "Don't approach. Keep eyes on it and tell me if it moves." "Deacon, if that's a cop sitting out there, if it's a cop sitting out there with the engine off in the dark watching a building full of children and doing nothing," Deacon said, "then it's not a cop." Silence on the other end. Then, "Copy that." "Well." Priest found him 3 minutes later at the folding table with the monitors, scrolling through files on a laptop that the man in the flannel shirt had not successfully locked before Gavel had encouraged him to reconsider his priorities. The files were encrypted, but the directory structure was visible, and the directory structure was damning in the specific way that things were damning when they implied scale, folder upon folder, each labeled with a state abbreviation, each containing subfolders labeled with what appeared to be dates going back 4 years. 4 years. "This isn't local," Priest said, looking over his shoulder. "No." "How big?" "I don't know yet." Deacon closed the laptop. "We need to take this with us." "Evidence chain." "I know." Deacon picked up the laptop. "We do it anyway." Priest looked at him with the particular expression he wore when he disagreed with a decision but understood why it was being made. When federal comes in, they'll have the laptop and they can sort out the chain question. Right now I don't know who federal is and I don't know what federal knows. And I am not leaving this building with that question unanswered. He looked at Priest directly. "You saw the file." You know what's on it. Priest was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. I saw it. What Priest had seen, what they had both seen in the 10 seconds before the laptop was closed, was a scanned document in the topmost open folder. A communication. And in the header of that communication, above the operational details and the routing information, was a name that should not have been anywhere near a document like this. A name they both recognized. Not because it belonged to a criminal, because it belonged to someone who was supposed to be hunting criminals. Neither of them said it out loud. In the middle of an active operation in a building that might still have ears they hadn't found, saying it out loud was not a thing they would do. But the knowledge of it sat between them like a third person, cold and solid and terrible. Outside, somewhere down the mountain, sirens were starting. Faint, still distant, but climbing. The evacuation of the children took 11 minutes. It should have taken fewer, but the youngest ones, 3 of them under the age of 5, were too frightened to walk with strangers and had to be carried, and carrying a child who does not trust you is not a fast operation. Rook took the smallest one, a boy who could not have been more than 3, who gripped the front of Rook's cuts with both fists and pressed his face into Rook's neck and made no sound at all, which was somehow worse than crying would have been. Gavel carried 2 of the others. The older children followed Sophie, who walked with her shoulders back and her chin level in a posture that was so precisely what Lily's had been that it landed in Deacon's chest like something physical. They moved them to the tree line, away from the vehicles, away from the building, into the cold dark of the mountainside where the sirens would find them. Deacon gave his jacket to Sophie without discussion. She put it on, and it reached her knees, and she did not say thank you, just looked at him with her level, assessing gaze, and he respected her for it. The 2 men from the loading dock were still zip-tied on the dock floor. The man from the folding table had been secured to a support column with the practical efficiency of men who had learned restraint techniques not from YouTube, but from necessity. None of them were injured. None of them were comfortable. The dark vehicle at the tree line had not moved. Deacon stood at the edge of the tree line and looked at it. 200 meters of frozen scrub between him and whatever was in that car. The sirens were louder now. Maybe 10 minutes out, maybe less. The children were behind him in the trees, Rook and Wire staying with them, cross-running the perimeter to make sure there were no additional personnel they had missed. I'm going to it, Deacon said. Priest stepped beside him. We're going to it. It might not be... It's not going to be good, Priest said, whatever it is. And you're not going alone. They crossed the open space between the building and the tree line at the measured pace of men who had decided that running was not the appropriate response to this particular uncertainty. The vehicle resolved as they approached. A dark gray SUV, civilian model, but the specific trim level that county departments ordered, parked nose out with a clear view of the facility entrance. The windows were fogged slightly from the inside. Someone had been in it for a while. Deacon came up on the driver's side. He looked through the glass. The man inside was awake. He was sitting with his hands on the steering wheel looking straight ahead, and he did not turn his head when Deacon appeared at the window, which meant he had known they were coming, which meant he had been watching them the whole time. He was in his late 50s, square jaw, a scar through one eyebrow. He turned his head slowly and looked at Deacon through the fogged glass. And what Deacon saw in that look was not aggression and not guilt, and not the calculating blankness of a man caught in a conspiracy. What he saw was something that took him a moment to name, because it was the last thing he had expected to find in this face, in this vehicle, in this place. He saw grief. Deep, certain, long-carried grief. The man pressed the button that lowered the window. Cold air moved between them. "My name is Harold Kane," the man said. His voice was flat and exhausted in the way that voices went flat when the weight behind them had been carried too long. "I know what you think. I need you to hear something before those sirens get here, because once they arrive, I won't be able to tell you this without destroying something I've spent 3 years building." Deacon looked at him, looked at the scar, looked at the hands on the steering wheel, still there, deliberately visible, the specific body language of a man who needs to communicate that he is not a threat. "You've got until the sirens hit the bottom of the ridge road," Deacon said. Kane nodded slowly. "There are 2 children who were moved last night," he said. "Not 3. Sophie was wrong about the count. One of them came back. The other 2 are in a secondary facility." He paused. "I know where it is. I've known for 6 weeks. I haven't moved on it because the moment I do, the man at the top of this operation gets a phone call and those children disappear permanently." He looked at Deacon steadily. "I've been building a case, a real one that takes the whole network, not just this location." "While children sat in that building," Deacon said. Kane held his gaze. He didn't flinch and he didn't qualify it. "Yes," he said. "While children sat in that building, I made a calculation that I will carry for the rest of my life. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am asking you to let me finish what I started." The sirens were at the bottom of the ridge road now. Deacon could see the first flicker of lights beginning to paint the lower tree line blue and red. "The man at the top," Deacon said. "Who is he?" Kane reached into his jacket pocket slowly, watching Deacon's eyes, and produced a folded photograph. He held it out through the window. Deacon took it, unfolded it, looked at it for a long moment in the cold dark. The face in the photograph was not anyone from a criminal registry. It was not someone who existed in the operational language of the underworld. It was a face that appeared on screens and podiums and the masthead of official communications. It was a face that Deacon recognized because he had shaken the hand attached to it 8 months ago at a veterans ceremony in the county fairgrounds, where the man had given a speech about sacrifice and protection and the duty of community to its most vulnerable. The Assistant United States Attorney for the district, the federal prosecutor whose office would be processing everything the Iron Wardens had just collected, the man who would be receiving the laptop. Deacon stood at the tree line in the cold November dark with 8 rescued children behind him and a laptop full of evidence in his hands, and the photograph of the man who controlled the investigation that was supposed to dismantle the network that had put those children in that building. And the sirens came up the mountain road, and the first cruiser's headlights swept through the trees. And Harold Kane said very quietly, "He already knows you're here. He knew the moment your call came into dispatch." Deacon looked at the photograph one more time. Then he folded it, put it in his inside pocket, against his chest, under the cuts. He looked at Priest. Priest was looking back at him with the expression of a man who has just watched the ground disappear from under a bridge he was standing on. The laptop in Deacon's hand suddenly weighed considerably more than it had 60 seconds ago, because the man whose name was in its files, the man they had been relying on to prosecute this case, to take the network apart from the top, had just become the reason the laptop could never reach federal hands through official channels, which meant everything they had just done, every child they had just pulled from that building, was the beginning of something, not the end of it. And the 2 children who were still missing were somewhere in the dark, in a location only Harold Kane knew, and the man who wanted to keep them hidden had just been told that the Iron Wardens had entered the board. Deacon looked at the first cruiser pulling into the facility lot. He looked at the laptop. He looked at Priest, whose expression had resolved from shock into the particular focused calm of a man who has decided that there is only one direction left. "We can't give them this," Priest said. "No," Deacon said, "which means we can't be here when they start asking questions." "No," which means I know what it means. It meant that 8 men who had just rescued 24 children were about to become the people the arriving officers would be looking for. It meant that Harold Kane's photograph and the laptop's files and the 2 missing children were now the Iron Warden's problem in a way that had no clean solution. It meant that the federal prosecutor who prosecuted outlaw motorcycle clubs for a living had just become their most dangerous enemy. And it meant Deacon had made a promise to a 5-year-old girl in a diner at the bottom of a mountain road. He had said yes. He had said yes, and he did not make promises he couldn't keep, and 2 children were still in the dark somewhere. "Move," he said. They moved. They came off the mountain the back way. Not the logging road they had climbed, that was already lit with cruiser lights and would be blocked within minutes once dispatch figured out the geography. Gavel knew a fire road that ran parallel to the ridge, unpaved, unlit, technically closed since the Forestry Service had decommissioned it in 2018, but still passable if you knew where the drainage culverts had collapsed and how wide the gap was between the tree line and the drop-off on the eastern switchback. He had ridden it twice in daylight. He had never ridden it in November at 12 miles an hour with no headlights. He rode it now. They all did. 8 bikes in a dark line, engines throttled down to the lowest possible register, the sound swallowed by the wind moving through the ridge pines. No lights. The moon gave them enough, barely enough, The kind of barely that meant Deacon's entire nervous system was conducting the ride for him, while his conscious mind worked the problem that the photograph in his inside pocket represented. Priest rode just off his left shoulder, close enough that Deacon could see the set of his jaw in the peripheral dark, the controlled tension of a man managing his own reaction to something that had not yet fully landed. Kane's SUV had not followed them. When Deacon had looked back from the edge of the tree line before they mounted up, it was still sitting where it had been, engine running now, Kane a silhouette behind the wheel. He had not moved toward the cruisers. He had not moved toward the wardens. He had just sat there, in the particular stillness of a man who has done the one thing within his power to do and is now waiting to see if it was enough. Deacon had made a decision in that moment that he had not explained to anyone because there was no time to explain and because the decision was the kind that either proved correct later or destroyed everything, with no middle ground available. He had left Kane there. He had not brought him. He had not turned him over to the arriving officers. He had looked at the grief in that face and at the photograph folded against his chest and at the arriving cruisers, and made the calculation that Harold Kane, sitting in a dark SUV at the edge of a rescued operation, was more useful as a free man with a 3-year investigation in his head than as a cooperating witness handed to a federal system that was being run by the man he was investigating. Whether that calculation was correct would become apparent in the next few hours, or it would become apparent in the way that wrong calculations became apparent, suddenly, irreversibly, with consequence. They came off the fire road onto a county road 12 miles south of the Last Mile Diner, and Deacon pulled over at the first wide shoulder and they all stopped, and for a moment nobody said anything. The engines ticked in the cold. Someone's exhaust was leaking slightly, a faint irregularity in the sound that hadn't been there before the mountain road. 8 men on 8 bikes in the dark on the side of a county road, and the space between them was dense with things that needed to be said, and the knowledge that saying them here, on a shoulder, in the cold, was not adequate to the weight involved. Garage, Deacon said. One word. They understood. The Iron Warden's garage sat on the industrial side of Linden, the county's second-largest town, a working shop, legitimately licensed, that serviced bikes and did restoration work and had been paying its taxes and its employees without incident for 6 years. It also had a back room with a heavy door and no windows that served, when necessary, as a space where things could be discussed that required a heavy door and no windows. They arrived in 2 groups, staggered by 10 minutes, because 8 bikes arriving simultaneously at 1:30 in the morning drew a different kind of attention than 2 or 3 at a time. By the time Deacon and Priest came through the garage's rear bay, the others were already inside. The roll-down door closed behind them, the overhead work lights on. The space smelled of motor oil and metal and cold concrete, and the particular human warmth of people who have been in the cold a long time coming inside. Someone had turned on the coffee maker in the back corner. The ancient machine was producing something that smelled like burnt rubber and intention, but it was hot, and heat was what they had. Deacon set the laptop on the workbench, set the photograph next to it. He took his time doing it, not theatrically, just the practical deliberateness of a man ensuring that what he was about to say had the proper physical evidence attached. Then he turned around. 7 men looking at him. Rook had blood on the left sleeve of his jacket, not his, from carrying one of the children down the mountain slope, and hadn't appeared to notice. Gavel's hands were still dirty from the fire road. Wire had taken his cutoff and was holding it, which was something Wire did when he was thinking hard enough that he needed his hands free. Cross was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, and his face arranged in the careful blankness that meant he was already angry and was choosing when to release it. The laptop has 4 years of operational records, Deacon said. Names, routes, locations, financial transfers. Whoever built this kept meticulous files, which means either they were arrogant or they were protected enough that they didn't care about exposure. He paused. The answer is both. He tapped the photograph. The network runs through the federal prosecutor's office for this district. The man at the operational top is the assistant U.S. attorney. He said the name. The room received it the way rooms receive things that were both entirely unexpected and, in retrospect, terrible obvious, with a silence that had texture, that had weight, that pressed against the walls. Cross pushed off from the far wall. Say that again. You heard it. I want to hear it again. It doesn't change with repetition. Deacon held his gaze. His name is in the files. He's been running cover for 4 years. Every federal investigation that got close to this network was redirected or killed at the prosecutorial level before it could go anywhere. He's the reason it survived. Cross stared at him. The anger in his face had moved past the controlled blankness stage and into something raw. And Kane is building the case against him. Has been for 3 years. 3 years, Cross repeated, and the way he said it carried every child in that warehouse, every night they had spent in that building, every foam sleeping pad and water bottle and plywood partition wall. 3 years of building a case while kids sat. I know. Deacon's voice did not rise. I know. That's not a thing I'm defending. That's a thing that exists, and we have to work with the world as it is. Kane could have come to us. He could have come to someone. Who? Priest said from the side of the room quietly. Who was he supposed to come to? The federal system his target controls? The local department where Lily identified a face at that warehouse? He's a county investigator building a case against a federal prosecutor. You think about who he could have gone to, and you tell me where that conversation ends well for him. Cross looked at Priest, then back at Deacon. The anger didn't leave his face, but it shifted, compressed, redirected inward, the way anger went when logic had engaged with it and hadn't defeated it but had contained it enough to function. So what do we do with the laptop? Hutch said. He was sitting on a stool near the coffee maker, cup in both hands, watching the room with the careful attention of a man who preferred to understand the full shape of a problem before contributing to it. We can't hand it through official channels, Deacon said. Not locally. We have a corrupt actor in the department, possibly more than one. Not federally. We hand anything to the federal system right now, and it lands on the desk of the man whose name is in the files. He looked at the laptop. We need to get it to someone outside the chain of command who can verify the contents and move on it independently. May Colton, Priest said. Deacon looked at him. Terry called her tonight, before we went up the mountain. Priest held his gaze steadily. I found out when I checked in with Terry 20 minutes ago. Colton is federal, but she's been on administrative reassignment for 8 months. She's not active on any case in this district, which means she's outside the chain that this prosecutor controls. Deacon thought about that for a moment. How much does she know? Terry gave her the basics. The child, the warehouse, the timeline. He paused. She's been awake since the call. She's been making her own calls. To who? She wouldn't say. But Terry says her voice changed. The way it changes when someone switched from listening to moving. Deacon picked up the laptop, turned it over in his hands once, looking at it the way you looked at something that had become simultaneously the most valuable and most dangerous object in a given radius. Then he set it back down. Get me Terry, he said. Oh. The call lasted 4 minutes. Terry's voice on the other end was steady, in the particular way it had been steady when she had looked at Lily's drawing and made a decision. The specific steadiness of a person who has already passed the moment of deciding and is now only executing. May Colton had made contact with an agent in the Bureau's Internal Affairs Division, not through official channels, but through a personal connection that predated both of their careers in law enforcement, a history Terry didn't detail and Deacon didn't ask about. The agent had asked 3 questions and then gone quiet, and then said something that Terry had written down word for word because she wanted to get it exactly right. She read it to Deacon. Tell whoever has the evidence to hold it physically and do not communicate its contents through any digital channel until I have the field team in position, 48 hours, maybe less. Tell them not to move on the secondary location without me. Deacon listened. And the children who are still missing? A beat. She knows, Terry said. She said, and I'm reading this exactly. Tell them the children are my first priority. Tell them I know what that means. He stood with the phone against his ear and looked at the laptop and thought about 48 hours and about 2 children in a secondary location and about the way Sophie had stood with her shoulders back between the door and the smaller children and the way the smallest boy had gripped the front of Rook's cuts with both fists and pressed his face into Rook's neck. Lily, he said. How is she? Asleep, Terry said. Finally. She held out until about 20 minutes ago. A pause. She asked me before she went out if you were okay. Deacon did not say anything for a moment. Tell her yes when she wakes up. He ended the call. It was Rook who noticed the blood. Not the blood on his own sleeve. He had noticed that, had looked at it without comment while Deacon was on the phone, had processed it in the way that men processed reminders of what they had been touching. A different blood. On the floor near the garage's rear bay door, in a pattern that was not a drip or a smear but a trail, the specific configuration of droplets that meant someone had been standing there long enough to bleed consistently in one spot before moving. Rook crouched beside it, touched the edge of the nearest droplet with one finger, looked at his fingertip. "Still wet," he said. The room went still in a way that was different from the earlier stillness. The earlier stillness had been the stillness of men processing information. This was the stillness of men who had just realized that while they were processing information, something had been happening that they had not been watching. Deacon was beside Rook in 4 steps. He looked at the blood trail, followed it with his eyes to the bay door, which was closed and locked, then turned and followed it in the other direction, across the garage floor, behind the second lift, towards the narrow passage that led to the storage room at the back. He put his hand on the storage room door, pushed it open. The man inside was sitting on the floor with his back against the far wall, and his legs extended in front of him and both hands pressed to his left side. He was wearing plain clothes, not the flannel shirt from the facility, but the specific, unremarkable quality of someone who had changed quickly and moved quickly and not quite made it far enough. He was approximately 40, lean, dark-haired, with a face that would have been unmemorable under different circumstances. His eyes were open and tracking when Deacon came through the door, which meant he was conscious, which meant the question of how he had gotten into the garage's locked storage room was one he was capable of answering. Deacon looked at the hands pressed to his side, looked at the blood coming through them, looked at the man's face. "Who are you?" he said. The man's breathing was labored, not fatally so, not yet, but in the specific register of someone whose body was engaged in the intensive work of managing damage. He looked at Deacon for a moment with an expression that was calculating the same way all expressions were calculating when a person was deciding how much truth they could afford. "My name is Daniel Reeves," he said. I need you to listen to me before you do anything else." "How did you get in here?" "Lock picks. I've had practice." A breath that caught slightly on the left side. "I've been following you since the mountain. I needed to talk to you somewhere that wasn't the mountain. You followed 8 motorcycles off a mountain in the dark. I had a head start. I knew where you'd go." He looked at Deacon steadily. "I've been watching the Iron Wardens for 6 months." The room behind Deacon had filled. Priest, gavel, rook, cross. The others arranged in the doorway and the passage beyond it, with the collective presence of 8 large men who had been in a state of escalating alert since midnight and were not inclined toward patience. 6 months, Deacon said. "Why?" "Because Harold Kane came to me 14 months ago. Because I'm the agent Terry's friend called tonight." A pause, the breath catching again. "Because I have been running a parallel investigation into this network since Kane brought me the first documentation, and tonight you walked into the middle of it and rescued 24 children and are now in possession of a laptop that contains the most complete operational record of a multi-state trafficking network that any investigation has ever produced. And if you handle it wrong in the next 48 hours, every person responsible for those children will walk free, and 2 more kids will disappear permanently." The storage room was very quiet. "You're May Colton's contact," Priest said from the doorway. "I'm her contact. I'm also the reason she's been on administrative reassignment for 8 months." He looked at the blood coming through his hands, made a small adjustment to the pressure he was applying, looked back up. "I pulled her off active casework to protect her from the chain of command. She doesn't know that. She thinks it was a procedural reassignment." Deacon crouched down to eye level with him. "You're bleeding." "I'm aware." "How?" "There were more personnel at the facility than you accounted for. One of them came out the east side when your team was moving the children. I intercepted him before he could reach the cruisers and before he could reach you." Reeves's jaw tightened slightly. "He had a knife. I had a few seconds of advantage, and then I didn't." "Where is he now?" "Secured, in the tree line, south side of the facility. He'll be found when they sweep the perimeter." "He's alive." A pause. "I was careful about that." Deacon looked at him for a long moment, at the wound, at the steadiness of his eyes. at the specific quality of calm that a person developed when they had been doing something dangerous for a long time and had made peace, in the operational sense, with the possibility that it might eventually go wrong. Rook, Deacon said without turning around. Kit. Rook moved. He had field medical training. They all did, to varying degrees of currency. And the garage kept a kit for exactly the kind of situations that legitimate motorcycle shops did not typically plan for. He came through with it, and Deacon stepped back and Rook crouched beside Reeves with the specific no-nonsense economy of someone whose medical training had been conducted in conditions where efficiency was not optional. Deacon stood, looked at Priest, looked at the room. "Give us a minute," he said to the others. They filtered back. Cross last, his eyes on Reeves with an expression that had not resolved from suspicion. Priest stayed. "The laptop," Reeves said, while Rook worked on him. His voice was controlled, but the effort of maintaining it was becoming visible. "There's a layer in those files that isn't indexed in the directory structure. It requires a specific key to access. I have the key." "What's in it?" Deacon said. "The names of every law enforcement and prosecutorial official across 6 states who has been compromised by this network. The payments. The dates. The specific cases that were suppressed." He looked at Deacon. 41 names. Harold Kane is not among them. I am not among them. But the assistant U.S. attorney is name 7 on the list. And name 1 is someone whose name will mean something to you and to every person in the next room. Deacon felt something move through him. The particular sensation of a structure he had been building in his head, the working model of what this situation was and what it required, shifting at a foundational level. "Who?" he said. Reeves told him. Deacon stood in the storage room of the Iron Warden's garage at 2:17 in the morning and did not move for approximately 4 seconds, which was a long time for him, which was long enough for Priest to look at his face and understand that whatever had just been said was not a complication. It was a collapse. "The secondary location," Deacon said. His voice had gone to a register that Priest recognized, had heard it before in 2 places, both of them involving moments where the normal calculus of risk and decision had been replaced by something simpler and colder and more absolute. "The 2 children who are still missing. Where?" Reeves looked at him. His own face had changed in response to whatever he saw in Deacon's expression. "Deacon, where?" "A property outside Kellner Township. Old equestrian facility, been vacant 4 years. The ownership chain runs through the same Delaware LLC as the mountain facility, but with an additional layer. It's 40 minutes from here." "Who's watching it?" "I had a man on it. Had." Reeves paused. "I got a message from him 40 minutes ago. 1 word, then nothing." 1 word, then nothing. In the operational language of surveillance, that was not ambiguous. Deacon turned to Priest. Priest was already reading him. "If his man is down, they know the location is compromised. They'll move before dawn. We don't have authorization. We didn't have authorization on the mountain either." Deacon looked at him. 2 kids, Priest." Priest held his gaze for a long moment. Then he made a sound that was not quite a word and turned toward the door. "I'll get the others." "Wait." Reeves' voice sharp with effort. They both stopped. "There's something else you need to know before you go anywhere." He had gotten paler in the last few minutes. Rook's work had slowed the bleeding but not stopped it, and the physical cost of managing pain while maintaining coherence was becoming visible in his face. "The name I gave you. Name 1 on the list." He looked at Deacon. "How long have you known him?" The question landed in a way that questions only landed when they contained something the asker already knew. Deacon looked at him steadily. "Say what you mean." "He's been with the network for 4 years. He's been with the Iron Wardens for 6. Reeves held his gaze, and his own gaze was not unkind, which somehow made it worse. "He was at the mountain tonight. He was on your left when you came through the dock door. He has known about the secondary location since the beginning, and he knows you have the laptop, and he left this garage 14 minutes ago." 14 minutes. Deacon turned his head slowly and looked at the arrangement of men in the passage beyond the storage room door. Counted them. 7. He looked at Priest. Priest looked back at him with an expression that had gone through shock and landed somewhere on the other side of it, in the specific devastated territory that existed past the point where disbelief was still possible. Cross was not there. Cross, who had been the loudest in his anger about Kane. Cross, who had pressed hardest on the question of the laptop. Cross, who had been the last one through the storage room door before Deacon had said, "Give us a minute," and who had left with his eyes on Reeves in a way that had looked like suspicion and was now, in retrospect, something else entirely. Cross, who had been with the Iron Wardens for 6 years, who had a plate in his right shoulder from Fallujah, who had shaken Deacon's hand at the threshold of the clubhouse on his first night and said, "This is a good place, brother," and who had been in every chapter meeting, every run, every backroom conversation for 6 years. 6 years. The coffee maker in the corner made a sound, mechanical, indifferent. Deacon's hand was flat against the wall beside the storage room door, and he became aware of it as if from a distance. The pressure of his palm against the painted cinder block, the cold of it, the realness of it, the fact that it was the only thing currently anchoring him to the practical world. His phone, Deacon said. The words came out in the same temperature as everything else he said, which took more than it would have an hour ago. "He has our number. He knows our routes. He knows where Terry's diner is." He looked at Priest. "He knows about Lily." Priest took one step forward, stopped. The word Lily had done to his face what it had done to Deacon's chest, something tectonic, something that ended the conversation about what the next decision was and rendered the question of authorization and exposure and the 48-hour timeline completely irrelevant. "How fast can we move?" Deacon said to the room. Not a question about logistics, a question about what they had left. Gavel was already up. Hutch was behind him. Wire. Rook, straightening from beside Reeves, his hand still marked with the man's blood. "Cross has a 14-minute lead," Gavel said. "On bikes, on back roads, at this hour," Priest said. "That's not as much as he thinks it is." Deacon looked at Reeves. "The equestrian facility. You're going to give Gavel every detail you have on the layout, access points, and whatever personnel count your man had before he went dark." Reeves nodded once. "And you? What are you going to do?" Deacon picked up the laptop from where Priest had set it on the storage room shelf when they had come in. He tucked it under his arm. He reached into his inside pocket and touched the folded photograph once, just a single point of contact, a reminder of what the photograph meant and what it required. "Cross knows where the children are," he said. "He's going to warn whoever's at that facility, which means they'll either move the children or—" He stopped. Did not complete the sentence because the alternative to move in this context was something he would not say aloud. "We have one chance, and Cross has to not reach them before we do." "He's on a bike," Hutch said. "In the dark. In November." "So are we," Deacon said. He looked at the men around him, at Rook's bloodied sleeve, at Wire holding his cut, at Gavel's dirty hands and Hutch's careful face, and Priest standing in the doorway with his jaw set and his eyes carrying something that was grief and fury braided together into something functional. He looked at the empty space where Cross had been standing. 6 years. And before that, the wars, and before the wars, whatever had made a man into someone who could sit in a room full of brothers and carry a secret like that for 6 years without once giving it away. Deacon was a man who understood compartmentalization, had been trained in it, had survived by means of it, had used it to function in years when functioning would otherwise have been impossible. He understood, in the clinical part of his mind, what it took to do what Cross had done. The clinical part of his mind was currently very small and very far away. "Mount up," he said. They went. Outside, the November cold hit with the specific force of cold that had been waiting. The bikes came to life one by one, 6 of them, Rook staying back with Reeves, because Reeves could not be left alone and could not be moved to a hospital through any channel they currently trusted. 6 engines in the dark, 6 sets of headlights cutting the empty industrial street, exhaust clouding white and immediate in the cold. Deacon pulled on his helmet, settled onto the bike, put his hands on the grips. 40 minutes to Kellner Township, if the roads were clear. Cross had 14 minutes. Less, now, 13, while they had been standing in the storage room, not moving. He would be on the county route by now, pushing hard, knowing they would come, knowing the timeline. Deacon pulled out of the garage lot. The others fell in behind him. And for the first time in the 9 years he had run this club, in the years of running toward things the world had told him to run away from, in the years of making decisions that had no clean outcomes and only degrees of consequence, he felt something that he had been specifically trained to not feel in operational conditions, Because it was the thing that made men make the wrong decision at the wrong moment for the wrong reason. He felt afraid. Not for himself. He had not been afraid for himself in longer than he could accurately remember. I was afraid for a 5-year-old girl in a diner at the bottom of a mountain road, asleep on a booth seat with a one-eyed rabbit in her arms, in a building whose location was now in the phone of a man who was 14 minutes ahead of them on a dark November road. He opened the throttle. The cold took his face, and the road took everything else, and behind him 6 headlights followed him into the dark like the world's last honest light, and somewhere ahead of them, Cross was riding toward a place where 2 children waited in the dark, and the distance between those children and the Iron Wardens was exactly as long as Deacon Vale had the will to close it. The road to Kellner Township was straight and dark and empty in the way that rural roads were empty at 2:30 in the morning. Not peaceful, just abandoned, the kind of empty that felt less like quiet and more like held breath. Deacon pushed the bike to 80 on the straightaways and took the curves at speeds that required the specific negotiation between momentum and physics that years of riding had made automatic, the kind of automatic that freed his conscious mind to work the problem while his body handled the machine. 40 minutes at legal speed. He was going to do it in 26. Behind him, 5 headlights held formation, Priest off his left shoulder, Gavel behind and right. Hutch, Wire, and Saber staggered in a V that took up the lane and the shoulder, both because there was nobody else on this road, and because the formation kept them together in the dark, and together was the only thing they had left. Cross had a lead. Cross had a phone with their numbers and their routes, and the address of the last mile diner where Terry was, and where Lily was sleeping on a booth seat with a rabbit in her arms. Cross had 6 years of the Iron Warden's operational knowledge, and he had been feeding it, how much of it, for how long, through what channels, to a network that moved children in ventilated containers and kept 4-year operational records and had 41 names on a list that represented the systematic corruption of law enforcement across 6 states. Deacon did not think about this. He thought about the road. He thought about the equestrian facility outside Kellner Township. He thought about 2 children in the dark and the distance between them and the bike under him and the 26 minutes he had committed to. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He did not answer it. Then it buzzed twice in quick succession, the code they used for urgent contact, and he pulled it from his pocket and held it against the handlebar where he could see the screen in the peripheral dark. The message was from Rook. 3 words and a number. Cross called ahead. 8. 8 personnel at the facility. Cross had called ahead. They had a number now, and they had the confirmation that the element of surprise, which had been their primary advantage on the mountain, was gone. He passed the phone back to Priest, who had come up close enough to read over his shoulder. Felt Priest drop back. Heard, even over the wind, the sound of Priest's voice. Low, controlled. Relaying the information to the others. 8 personnel, 6 riders. He opened the throttle further. The equestrian facility appeared first as a driveway marker, one of those reflective posts that rural properties used when the address was too far from the road for the number to be visible, and then as a gap in the tree line, and then as a structure beyond the gap, dark against darker, the silhouette of a building that had once housed horses and now housed something else entirely. No lights, which was wrong. A facility with 8 personnel and advance warning and 2 children to move should have had vehicle lights at minimum. People preparing to leave generated light, generated movement, generated the visible signature of urgency. This was dark and still. Deacon slowed, held up a fist without looking back, the signal that translated as stop and hold in the universal language of men who had moved in formation through hostile terrain. And the 5 bikes behind him throttled down and stopped at the edge of the driveway in a cluster, engines idling. He sat on his bike and looked at the building and let his eyes work the dark, the way they had learned to work it, finding the movement and the heat and the shape within shapes that daylight obscured but darkness, if you gave it time, eventually revealed. There. 2 vehicles on the far side of the main building, barely visible past the corner of the structure, not positioned for loading, positioned for blocking, facing outward, which meant they had not been preparing to move the children. They had been preparing for the wardens. Cross had given them more than a warning. He had given them time to set up. Priest came up beside him, put his mouth close to Deacon's ear. They're not running. No. 8 men and they're set up for engagement, Priest's voice was stripped of everything except the operational layer. They're going to try to end this here. If they run with the children and we follow, it goes on, Deacon said. If they end us here, it stops. No witnesses to the secondary location, no one left to carry the laptop. They'd have to find the laptop. They know we brought it out of the mountain, Cross told them. Deacon's jaw tightened. They think we have it with us. Do we? Deacon reached inside his cuts. His fingers found the hard edge of the laptop case where he had transferred it, at the garage, to a flat messenger-style bag worn under the cuts against his body. Yes. Deacon. It doesn't leave my sight until I hand it to someone with a federal badge and a face I trust. He looked at the building. Split. Same configuration as the mountain, but we don't have the advantage of dark or surprise. We have the bikes. Priest was quiet for a moment. As cover. As noise. As distraction. As the reason everyone in that building looks at the front while gavel and wire go around the back. They'll be expecting that. They'll be expecting us to be careful, Deacon said. They'll be expecting 8 men who aren't going to risk dying. He looked at Priest, and in the dark, his face was very clear, the scar along his jaw, the eyes that had looked at this kind of situation before and resolved it not through the absence of fear, but through the decision that fear occupied a different part of him than decisions did. We're not going to be careful. Priest looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then he moved. They came up the driveway with 4 bikes running headlights full and engines at full volume. No stealth, no approach. Just 4 motorcycles coming up a gravel driveway at 50 miles an hour, making the specific kind of noise that made everyone in a prepared position look toward the sound. The gravel sprayed under the tires and the headlights swept across the front face of the main building, and for approximately 4 seconds, everything in that facility was focused on the front. 4 seconds was what Gavel and Wire had asked for. Deacon brought the bike hard left at the end of the driveway, laying it over into a controlled slide that put the machine between him and the building, the engine block, and the frame as cover. Priest did the same on the right. Hutch and Saber peeled in opposite directions, bikes going to the ground on their sides in the pre-planned controlled drops that left the machines as barriers, and the men moving on foot behind them. The first shot came from the upper window of the main structure. Not a rifle, a handgun, which at this range and in this dark was more about suppression than accuracy. The round hit Gravel 12 feet from Deacon's position, and he was already moving, using the downed bike as the low point of an arc that took him toward the near wall of the building. A second shot, closer. Someone in the facility had a better angle than the first shooter and was moving toward it. Deacon pressed against the wall, breathed, counted the shots he had heard, and extrapolated the positions behind them, and built the interior geometry of the situation in his head. The way he had built 100 situations in his head over 16 years, using the information available, sound, angle, delay between shots, the specific acoustic signature of a round passing close, to construct a model of where the people were who were trying to kill him. 2 shooters he had located. 1 high, 1 moving at ground level to his left. The other 6 were either repositioning or covering the rear against Gavel and Wire, which meant the rear approach was going to hit resistance, and Gavel and Wire knew it and had gone anyway, because 4 seconds was what they had asked for, and 4 seconds was what they had gotten, and the rest was the work. His phone buzzed. He pulled it. Rook's contact name, and below it a single character, the number 2. Gavel and Wire had found 2 of the 8 at the rear. They were engaged. That left 6 distributed through the structure, 2 of whom Deacon had located by muzzle flash and trajectory. Priest appeared at his right shoulder from nowhere in the specific way Priest had been appearing at his right shoulder for 9 years, which was not magic, but was the result of 2 men who knew each other's patterns well enough that coordinating movement required nothing beyond proximity and intent. He had a length of chain from one of the bikes, a detail that Deacon registered as both practical and inadvertently significant, wrapped twice around his left fist as a weight and an impact instrument. Ground level is moving toward the southeast corner, Priest said. His voice was absolutely flat. The voice that meant the operational brain had fully engaged and everything else had stepped aside. He'll have a clear angle on you in about 12 seconds. How do you want to do this? I'll take the corner. You go for the door. The door is where they'll have the most people. Yes, Priest said. It is. They looked at each other in the dark against the cold wall of a building where 2 children were somewhere inside, and the look contained everything that needed to be communicated, which was nothing that hadn't already been established over 9 years and was simply being confirmed one more time. Priest went left. Deacon went for the door shut. The door was a sliding barn-style panel that had been chained from the inside. He hit it with his shoulder at a run, and the chain held, but the door's track gave, partially, enough to create a gap that was not adequate for a man his size, moving normally, but was adequate for a man his size moving with the specific disregard for his own body that occurred when the only operating variable was forward. He went through. The inside of the facility was dark, except for 2 battery-powered work lights positioned in the central aisle. The kind of industrial temporary lighting that suggested the electricity had been shut off or cut deliberately, which meant someone had prepared this space with the specific intention of operating in conditions where exterior observation would be limited. The aisle ran the length of the building, old horse stalls on each side, the smell of hay and animal that time had not entirely erased overlaid with the same diesel and concrete smell from the mountain facility. He had approximately half a second to absorb this before the man at the near end of the aisle moved. The man was large, genuinely large, the kind of physical scale that came from work rather than intention. And he moved fast for his size, which meant he had done this kind of thing before, and his body knew the geometry of close-range engagement the way Deacon's did. He covered the distance between them in 4 steps, and what followed was not a fight in any cinematic sense, but rather a specific brutal negotiation between 2 bodies for the physical control of a space, conducted in the near dark, with the work lights creating hard shadows that were as much hindrance as help. Deacon took a hit to the left side of his ribs that would tell him something was cracked the next time he had the stillness to inventory his body. But not now, because now the information was available and filed and irrelevant to the immediate sequence. He put his elbow into the man's jaw on the second exchange, felt the impact, felt the man's legs change, and took the advantage that created without pausing to determine its extent. 30 seconds, maybe less. The man was on the floor and Deacon was moving, ribs communicating their complaint in a continuous low-priority signal that he was not currently accepting. Another figure at the midpoint of the aisle, this one smaller, faster, holding something. The work light behind him made reading the object difficult. Not a firearm, the silhouette was wrong for that. And then the object moved and the silhouette resolved, and Deacon dropped his shoulder and went low, and the baton came down on the back of his left shoulder instead of the base of his skull, which was where it had been aimed. The left arm went briefly non-operational. He used the right. It was sufficient. He straightened. His shoulder was reporting significant damage and his arm was coming back online in the particular unpleasant way that limbs came back online after a nerve impact, tingling, then burning, then functional. He kept moving, counted what he had encountered, counted what gavel and wire were managing at the rear, counted what was remaining and where in the building 2 children were most likely to be kept, using Lily's facility as the reference model and applying it to this structure. The stalls near the far end, away from the loading access. Small space, defensible, not visible from the main entrance. He went for the far end. He found Cross outside the last stall on the right. Cross was standing in the aisle with his back to the stall door and his arms at his sides and his face arranged in an expression that was so precisely the face Deacon had known for 6 years that looking at it now, knowing what it contained, produced a specific interior effect that Deacon did not have language for and would not have used language for even if he had. Cross looked at him coming down the aisle, at the shoulder, at the ribs, at the expression on Deacon's face, which he had apparently been expecting, but which still did something to his own. "Deacon," he said, "move away from the door. I need you to hear me. Move away from the door, Cross. They'll kill me." His voice was level, but there was something underneath the level that was not steady. A frequency that Deacon recognized because he had heard his own voice carry it, once, in a field outside a burning building in Kandahar, when the calculation had been the same, and the options had been the same, and the cost of the wrong choice had been everything. "If I step away from this door, the people behind me—" "They're not behind you anymore," Deacon said. "Whatever protection you thought being in this building gave you, it's gone. Gavel and wire are coming through the rear, and Priest is at the corner, and whatever was in this building when we arrived is no longer the primary variable." Cross looked at him. Something moved in his face that was complicated and fast and resolved before Deacon could fully read it. You don't understand what they have on me. I don't need to understand it. They have my daughter, Deacon. The level voice broke on the last word and then reformed around it, and what came through the break was something so raw and so completely without the cover that the previous 6 years had been constructed to conceal that it stopped Deacon's forward motion for a single step. She's 11. They've had access to her for 3 years. They told me, if I stopped cooperating, where is she? A pause. Cross stared at him. What? Your daughter, where is she? I don't... He stopped. I don't know. They moved her. 3 weeks ago they moved her, and they told me it was a precaution. Is she in this building? Cross's face did something that Deacon had never seen on it in 6 years and hoped he never saw on anyone's face again. The understanding of what 3 weeks of moved her might mean for an 11-year-old girl in the hands of the people who had been running this network for 4 years moved through Cross's expression like something physical, like watching a structure fail from the inside out. I don't know, Cross said. His voice was barely there. I don't know. Deacon looked at him for a moment. Then he stepped forward and put his hand on Cross's arm. Not grabbing, just present. The specific weight of contact that communicated something that did not have adequate words, and moved him aside. He opened the stall door. 2 children, a boy and a girl, 7 and 9 approximately, huddled together in the back corner of the stall with their arms around each other, blinking against the light from the aisle. They were dressed, had blankets, were physically intact in the visible assessment sense of the phrase. The girl's eyes went immediately to the leather jacket and the scarred face, and did not look away. My name is Deacon, he said. He crouched down to their level. I'm taking you out of here. Right now. Can you walk? The boy looked at the girl. The girl looked at Deacon for another moment with the assessment that he was beginning to understand was the specific look of a child who had survived by learning very fast how to read which adults were, which kind of dangerous. She stood up. She took the boy's hand. Yes, she said. Behind him, Cross made a sound that was not a word. The front of the facility had changed when Deacon came back through it. Priest was at the far end of the aisle, along with Hutch and Saber, and the 3 men from the facility who had been operational in the main building were no longer operational in any meaningful sense. Gavel came through the rear door with wire behind him, and Gavel had blood on his face, his own, from a cut above his eyebrow that had bled with the enthusiasm that head wounds had, and was holding his right wrist against his body in a way that indicated it had been compromised, but he was moving and his eyes were clear and the rear was clear behind him. 2 children, Deacon said, and Hutch was already moving toward the girl and the boy, already crouching down, already doing the thing that men who had been carrying their own histories of loss and violence for long enough eventually learned to do, which was to make themselves small and present and not frightening, to offer their presence as something different from the presences these children had been surrounded by. The girl looked at Hutch with the same assessment she had given Deacon. Then she let go of the boy's hand briefly and took Hutch's. Cross stood in the aisle. He stood there with his arms at his sides and his face empty in the way that faces went empty when the structure behind them had been removed. The anger that had been in the room, that had been building in all of them from the moment Deacon had said Cross's name in the storage room, was present in the aisle, in the way that things were present when everyone was aware of them and no one was addressing them directly because the children were there and the children were what mattered first. The facility is clear, Priest said. I was looking at Cross with a stillness in his face that was not peace. Rear is clear, Gavel confirmed. 2 secured, 1 incapacitated. 2 ran. He paused. Let them go. We didn't have the capacity to pursue and hold. 2 had run. Who they were and where they went and who they would be calling in the next 10 minutes was information Deacon added to the working model. It changed the timeline again. Whatever window they had for moving the children and the evidence had just become narrower. We need to move, Deacon said. And him? Priest, looking at Cross, not asking what to do with him. The Iron Wardens were not the people who decided that, and all of them knew it, asking something else, something that had no clean answer. Deacon looked at Cross. Cross looked back. In his eyes was the calculation. Deacon could see it, had seen it in other men in other contexts, of a person who has understood that the thing they were most afraid of has already happened, and the question now is only what comes after. His daughter, Deacon said. She may be in this network. The aisle went very still. Priest absorbed this. His jaw worked once. If she is, Reeves finds her, through his channels. Deacon held Cross's gaze. That's the arrangement. Cross looked at him for a long moment. The specific quality of the look was something Deacon would carry for a long time. Not gratitude, which would have been inadequate, but the look of a man who has been handed something he knows he does not deserve and is trying to understand what to do with it. You'd do that, Cross said. After, the children first, Deacon said. That's always been the rule. Whatever comes after that, we sort after. He looked at Priest. Secure him. He comes with us. Deacon. He has information. He has 3 years of operational knowledge about this network and how it functions and who he reported to. That information belongs to Reeves and to May Colton and to the investigation. He held Priest's gaze. We deliver him with the laptop. We let the investigation determine what happens to him. A pause. All of it. Priest looked at him, looked at Cross, made the decision in the specific way Priest made decisions, completely, without residue. Move, he said to Cross. Cross moved. They came out of the facility into the cold and the dark at 3:14 in the morning with 2 children, 1 restrained former brother, a laptop containing 4 years of evidence against a multi-state trafficking network, and the photograph of a federal prosecutor in Deacon's inside pocket. 6 bikes, 8 people. One of them a man they had trusted for 6 years who had been carrying a secret that had cost more than anyone had yet calculated. 2 of them children who would need things that no motorcycle club and no amount of operational competence could fully provide. Deacon looked at the sky. No sirens yet. The 2 who had fled from the rear had at most a 15-minute head start on whatever call they would make to whoever they called, and whoever they called would be making their own calls. And the chain of those calls would eventually reach the federal prosecutor whose name was on the laptop, and when it reached him, the next set of moves would begin. 48 hours, Reeves had said. Hold the evidence for 48 hours and give him time to position his team. They had been operating for approximately 2.5 of those hours, and the situation had already changed 3 times in ways that 48 hours had not accounted for. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Rook's contact. But the message wasn't from Rook. It was a number he didn't recognize, and the message was 4 words. No punctuation, no context. Diner. Now. Lily gone. The phone in his hand felt like it changed weight. He looked at Priest, held up the phone. Priest read it. His face did what it did, and then it stopped doing that and went to the place it went when there was only the next correct action and everything else had been suspended. How, was all he said. Deacon did not know how. He knew that Cross had called ahead and that Cross had known the diner's location, and that 11 minutes had passed between when Cross had left the garage and when Reeves had messaged about the call. 11 minutes in which Cross had been alone with his phone, in which the number of calls he could have made was not 1 but several, in which the last mile diner's address had passed from Cross's knowledge to the network's knowledge, and from the network's knowledge to whoever the network had sent. He looked at Cross. Cross was looking at the ground. His hands were secured behind him. His face was doing something that Deacon read as the specific expression of a man who is understanding, in real time, the full consequence of a decision he made. Not the consequence to himself, but the consequence to a 5-year-old girl who had walked barefoot across a frozen parking lot and handed everything she had to 8 men in leather because she had no one else. Did you call the diner? Deacon said. Cross did not look up. I called my contact. I gave him the update. The diner was part of the update. A pause. I didn't know she was still there. I thought they'd have moved her to a safe house by... Did you know they would go for her? Deacon said. His voice had gone to the temperature of the air around them, which was very cold. Cross looked up. His face was carrying everything it was capable of carrying, and it was full. No, he said. I swear to you. Don't, Priest said quietly. The single word landed without heat and without mercy, and Cross stopped. Deacon was already at his bike. The last mile diner was 17 minutes from Kellner Township on county roads at legal speed. He had done that kind of math before. He did it now, and the answer was unacceptable. And so he revised the variable, the only variable he could revise, which was speed. He looked at Gavel. "Can you ride?" Gavel looked at his compromised wrist, flexed the fingers once, made the face of a man doing an honest assessment. "Yes." "The children go with Hutch and Saber. You take Cross, Priest and Wire with me." "Deacon." Priest at his side, his voice pitched for Deacon's ears. "If they already have her." "They don't." He didn't explain the certainty. It wasn't certainty. It was the thing that functioned as certainty when certainty wasn't available, which was the decision to act as if the best possible version of events was still achievable, because the alternative to that decision was to stop, and stopping was not among the options. How do you know? Because Rook sent the message and Rook is still there. If it was over, Rook wouldn't be sending messages. Priest held his gaze. "That's not—" "I know what it is." Deacon held his gaze back. "Ride." He started the bike. The engine came alive under him, the sound of it in the cold open air of the Kellner facility, the specific voice of the machine that had carried him through 9 years of roads, both literal and otherwise. And he took the driveway at speed, gravel spraying, the headlight cutting the dark ahead. Behind him, Priest and Wire fell in immediately. 17 minutes. Revised. He was going to do it in 11. The county road opened up ahead of him, straight and dark and empty, and the cold took his face and the engine answered every demand he made of it. And somewhere 11 minutes away in a diner with a broken neon sign, a 5-year-old girl who had run barefoot through the snow to tell 8 strangers about the other children was either still safe or was not. And the distance between those two possibilities was exactly as long as the road under his tires, and he was closing it at a speed that the road had not been built for. And he did not care. He did not care. His left hand ached where the impact had compressed something in the wrist. His ribs spoke to him in the continuous patient voice of structural damage that had decided to be heard. His shoulder, where the baton had come down, had gone from burning to a low electric numbness that would become something worse when the adrenaline cleared. None of it occupied the part of him that was currently in charge. The part of him that was currently in charge had made a promise to a 5-year-old girl in a booth at the Last Mile Diner, and it was a very simple part, and it did not negotiate, and it did not revise, and it had one remaining instruction that it was executing with everything the body around it had left. The diner's broken neon sign appeared in the distance, a smear of color against the dark red and blue, buzzing its perpetual short circuit into the cold November air. And as Deacon came off the last curve and the straightaway opened toward it, he saw the vehicles in the parking lot. 3 of them. Dark. Engines running. He could see the exhaust in the cold air, the white clouds of it rising into the dark above the lot. And he saw Rook. Rook was standing on the diner's front step with his arms out from his sides and his hands visible and his body positioned between the door behind him and the 3 vehicles in the lot, in a posture that Deacon recognized at a distance of 200 meters, because it was the same posture Sophie had used in the warehouse stall and that the human body arrived at instinctively when it had decided to be the thing that stood between. 3 vehicles. Rook alone. The door behind him. "Behind the door, Lily." Deacon did not slow down. He did not slow down. The bike hit the parking lot at a speed that was not appropriate for a parking lot, and Deacon let it carry him through the turn, the rear tire breaking loose on the frost-slicked asphalt, and then catching, the machine responding to the correction the way it always responded, immediately, completely, without argument. He brought it between the nearest dark SUV and the diner's front step, and laid it down on its side in a controlled fall that put 700 pounds of motorcycle between Rook and the vehicle to his left, the engine still running, the headlight cutting sideways across the lot like a fallen lighthouse. He was off it before it stopped moving. The cold hit him. The lot smelled of exhaust and frost and the specific metallic quality of air before something happened in it. 3 vehicles. He counted doors, 2 per vehicle, most of them already open, men standing at the hoods and the fenders using the vehicles as cover in the pre-engagement positioning of people who had done this before and expected to do it efficiently. 6 men that he could see. Behind him, 2 sets of headlights entered the lot. Priest and Wire, coming off the county road at the same speed Deacon had used, splitting left and right as they entered and bringing their bikes to stops at angles that created additional barriers, additional geometry, additional points in the lot that the men from the SUVs would have to account for. Rook did not move from the step. His arms were still out from his sides. His hands were still visible. But his body had changed, had shifted fractionally, the weight redistributing in the specific way that happened when a man who knew how to use his body went from demonstrating that he was unarmed to demonstrating that being unarmed was not equivalent to being unready. 6 and 3, Rook said without looking at Deacon. His voice was absolutely even. The voice of a man reporting a field assessment. 6 outside. 3 went in 20 minutes ago. 3 inside. Lily was inside. Terry was inside. Deacon stood in the cold parking lot with the fallen bike behind him and the 3 SUVs in front of him and did the thing he had done in parking lots and corridors and open fields and burning buildings for 20 years, which was to compress the situation to its essential structure. What he had, what they had, what needed to happen, and in what order. What he had? 3 riders, himself. 1 man on the step. The motorcycle as a barrier on the left flank. The dark on the right, which was not cover but was concealment. And concealment was the lesser version of cover, but it was something. What they had, 6 men in prepared positions, 3 inside with whatever leverage the inside of the diner provided. What needed to happen? The 3 inside needed to come out without Lily. In what order? Now. He walked toward the nearest SUV. The man behind the hood watched him come. He was professionally still in the way that people who had been trained to be still were still, not natural stillness, but managed stillness, the kind that required effort and therefore had a tell, a faint muscular tension around the jaw and the hands that indicated the management was ongoing. He watched Deacon walk toward him across the frost-slicked lot at a pace that was neither aggressive nor conciliatory, just forward, and his managed stillness acquired a new layer of management. "That's far enough," the man said. Deacon stopped at the front corner of the SUV. He was close enough to read the man's face clearly, close enough that the distance between them had stopped being a tactical advantage for either party and become something else, a negotiation conducted in proximity, where the variables were presence and will and the specific quality of attention one man brought to another. "The child," Deacon said, "and the woman. They come out." The man looked at him. "You're not in a position to make demands." "I'm not making a demand. I'm telling you what's going to happen." Deacon held his gaze with the specific quality of attention he had learned over 20 years was more effective than volume or movement. The quality that communicated that the person delivering it had arrived at a decision and the decision was not subject to revision by any variable the other person controlled. "Your operation is over. The laptop is outside this county already." A lie, delivered without inflection. "The federal investigation it belongs to is not run by the man you work for. The 3 years you've been protected are finished." He paused. "The only question is whether the people in that building come out before this gets worse or after." The man's jaw worked once. His eyes moved, not to the other men in the lot, not to the vehicles, but slightly upward and left, which was the involuntary eye movement of a person consulting their uncertainty. He had been prepared for force. He had not been prepared for a man walking toward him across a frost-covered parking lot at 3:30 in the morning and talking to him as if the outcome was already settled. "We walk," the man said finally. "Not agreement, assessment. You walk. The child and the woman stay." The communication that moved between the man at the SUV and the others in the lot was not verbal. It was the specific non-language of people who had worked together long enough that decisions passed between them without words, carried in posture and eye contact and the quality of silence. Deacon watched it happen, watched the weight of it move from man to man, watched the calculation run. The man looked at Deacon one more time with the expression of someone filing the details of this moment away for a purpose Deacon could not predict and did not currently have the capacity to prevent. "The ones inside go when we do," he said. "No." Deacon's voice was the same temperature it had been throughout this conversation, which was the temperature of the air, which was very cold. "The ones inside go first. Then you go." Another pause, longer this time. Then the man pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted 15 seconds, and the diner door opened. The 3 men who came out of the diner moved quickly in the way of people who had been told the situation had changed and had decided that the situation changing was adequate reason to be somewhere else. They came through the door one after the other and crossed the step and went to the nearest SUV without looking at Deacon or Rook, which was the specific avoidance of eye contact that meant they were making the conscious decision to not store his face beyond what they had already stored, which meant they were making a calculation about future exposure that told him more about their confidence in the network's survival than anything they could have said directly. The man at the hood of the first SUV was last. He looked at Deacon once more as he reached the driver's door. The look was not threatening. It was the look of a man who had concluded something and had chosen to let the conclusion be visible, which was its own kind of threat, the kind that required no action in the present moment. The 3 SUVs left the lot. Deacon watched them go. Then he turned and went into the diner. Terry was standing behind the counter with both hands flat on the surface and the expression of a woman who had spent the last 20 minutes being very afraid and had decided that the way she was going to manage that was to stand behind the counter with her hands on it and not move until moving was clearly the correct option. She looked at Deacon when he came through the door, and the expression shifted, not to relief, not immediately, but to the precursor of relief, the moment before it arrived. "She's in the back," Terry said. Her voice was remarkably steady. "I put her in the kitchen when I heard the vehicles. She stayed. She stayed. She didn't want to. I told her that staying was how she helped you." Terry's hands came off the counter. She pressed them together in front of her, a single brief moment of something that was not quite composure failing and not quite holding, before she put them at her sides. "She's been asking about you since she woke up." Deacon went through the counter, passed through to the kitchen. The kitchen of the Last Mile Diner was small and smelled of old coffee and industrial cleaner and the grease-warm air of a fryer that had been off for hours but remembered being on. Lily was behind the prep table, sitting on the floor with her back against the refrigerator unit and Milo the rabbit in her arms and her knees pulled up to her chest. She was in the same nightgown she had arrived in, with a diner apron draped over her like a blanket, Terry's doing, the practical warmth of a woman who thought in terms of what was immediately available. She looked up when Deacon came through the kitchen door. She looked at his face, at his shoulder, at the way he was holding his left arm slightly away from his body, at whatever was in his expression that he was not consciously constructing, but was there regardless. "You got hurt," she said. "A little. Did you find them?" "Yes." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she stood up, still holding Milo, and the apron fell to the floor and she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest, in the particular way that children held on when they had been holding something inside for a very long time and had finally been given a space where it was possible to put it down. He put his right hand on the back of her head. His ribs communicated their complaint. He did not move. They stood in this kitchen for a moment that had no particular length, long enough for Lily's breathing to slow from the tight, elevated rhythm it had been carrying to something that was simply breathing, long enough for the sound of the last SUV's engine to fade completely from the lot outside, long enough for the diner's refrigerator unit to cycle on and add its low hum to the quiet. Then Lily stepped back. She looked up at him with the face that was not calm but was beyond calm, that had been beyond calm since she walked through the diner door at 11:43 and chose him out of a room full of strangers. "You promised," she said. "I know." "You kept it." "Yes." She looked at him for another moment, then she held out Milo, not giving it to him, holding it out in the way of a child making an offering that carries more weight than the object itself, asking without asking whether the object would be received with the appropriate understanding of what it meant. Deacon took the rabbit, held it in his right hand, looked at the place where the missing eye had been. "I'll hold him for a while," he said. Lily nodded, once, with the gravity of someone who has just concluded an important agreement. Then she went back to the prep table and climbed up onto the counter and sat there with her feet dangling, watching him with the patient attention of a child who has decided that the person in front of her is worth watching, which was, in its way, the highest assessment she was capable of making. The next 4 hours happened the way things happened after long operations when the body had been running on the specific fuel of necessity, and necessity began to run out, slowly and not smoothly, and with a particular kind of accumulated exhaustion that settled into the bones and the joints and the places where damage had been taken and then metabolized into function and was now presenting its invoice. Priest came in from the lot and drank 3 cups of Terry's terrible coffee without commenting on its quality, which was a form of respect. Gavel came in with his wrist wrapped in a strip of flannel that Wire had torn from the inside of his jacket, and he sat in a corner booth and did not say much, and Terry brought him coffee, and then, without being asked, brought him a bag of ice for the wrist, which he accepted with a nod that carried more gratitude than most men managed with words. Wire sat at the counter and stared at nothing in a way that meant he was staring at something specific and internal, something he was working through in the particular solitary way that Wire had always worked through difficult things, and nobody interrupted him. Hutch and Saber arrived 40 minutes later, having brought the 2 children from Kellner Township to the county hospital's emergency intake through an anonymous drop that ensured the children were immediately within a system that could contact their families, could provide medical assessment, could begin whatever they needed to begin. It was not the clean delivery they would have preferred. It was what the situation allowed. Hutch sat in the booth across from Gavel and put his head back against the vinyl and closed his eyes, and the expression on his face in that moment was something Deacon looked at and then looked away from, because some things were private even in rooms where everyone present had earned the right to see. Cross was in the lot. In Gavel's sidecar rig, which had been the most practical containment option available, secured but not in a way that was punitive, practical, because the situation required it, because the next steps required him to be available for the conversation that was coming. Deacon checked on him once. Cross was sitting with his head against the sidecar's frame and his eyes open, looking at nothing in the way that people looked at nothing when they were looking at everything they had done. Deacon did not say anything to him. Not yet. There was a conversation coming that would take all the air it required and more, and this was not the time for it. At 4:47 in the morning, a vehicle came into the lot that was not an SUV and was not a cruiser and was not a bike. It was a rental car, mid-size, silver, and it parked at the far end of the lot, and the woman who got out of it was 52 years old and moved like someone who had been driving for 3 hours and had been thinking the entire time. She wore a field jacket over what appeared to be clothing she had pulled on in a hurry, and she carried a bag over one shoulder and a federal credential in her left hand that she showed to Priest when she reached the door, and Priest looked at it and looked at her and stepped aside. May Colton came into the Last Mile Diner at 4:47 in the morning and looked at the room, at the bikers in the booths, at Terry behind the counter, at the child sitting on the prep counter in the kitchen visible through the pass-through. And her face did the thing that faces did when the full physical reality of an operation replaced the verbal and digital version. Deacon put the laptop on the counter in front of her. She looked at it, then at him. "You look like hell." "The ribs need attention," he said. "Later." "Is this everything?" "Everything from the mountain facility. There's a secondary layer in the files." He put the folded photograph on the counter beside the laptop. "And this?" She unfolded it, looked at it for a moment. Her expression did not change in the external sense, but something moved behind it that was both professional and human, and resolved into professional without fully erasing the human. "Reeves told me," she said. "I've been making calls since 3 a.m. She looked up. "You know what it means?" "For the case." "His own office, his own prosecutors." "Yes." She folded the photograph back, put it in her bag with the laptop. "It's the reason it took 3 years. It's the reason Reeves went outside the chain. It's the reason I've been on administrative reassignment for 8 months. She looked at him steadily. "It's also the reason this ends. All of it. Not just this district." She paused. "The 41 names. Reeves gave me the key to the secondary layer at 4 a.m. I've already transmitted the file to 3 separate locations outside the affected chains. It cannot be suppressed." Deacon looked at her. "It's over," she said. "The part that depends on secrecy. The rest takes time, and it takes process, and it takes more of both than any of us want, but the structure is broken. The protection is gone." She held his gaze. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand. Kane. He's on the mountain road, or he was." Deacon had not had contact with Harold Kane since the tree line at the facility. Whether Kane had been taken into the arriving officer's custody or had managed to remain the specific kind of invisible that 3 years of careful operation had taught him to be, he did not know. He built the case. He should get credit for building it. "He will." May's voice was precise. "Not public credit, not the kind that comes with a ceremony, but the kind that matters, which is the kind that goes into the record and stays there. She paused. His daughter. Deacon went still. Cross's daughter, May said. Reeves gave me her name at 4:15. She was moved 3 weeks ago, not to another facility. She was moved to a family placement through a legitimate foster care channel that the network had compromised. Her voice did not change temperature. She is physically safe. She has been in the placement for 3 weeks. She doesn't know her father's involvement. She thinks he stopped contacting her because of the investigation he was doing for work. Another pause. That's the version she has been given, and it is the version that will be supported, because she is 11 years old, and the truth that she is currently protected from is a thing that can be handled in measured increments when she is ready, with the right support, rather than all at once in a parking lot. Deacon listened to this. He looked at the counter in front of him for a moment. Then he looked at the pass-through where Lily was still sitting, and Lily was watching him from the kitchen with her patient, thorough attention. And Cross, he said. May looked at him. That's a complicated answer. Give me the simple version. He cooperates fully. He is a cooperative witness with information that is material to the prosecution of 41 individuals across 6 states and the dissolution of a network that has operated for 4 years. She looked at him steadily. What that cooperation results in, procedurally, is not mine to determine. It goes to a clean office in a clean district. She paused. What I can tell you is that his daughter needs a father, and that the system has, occasionally, the capacity to account for the full shape of a situation rather than only its most prosecutable elements. Deacon nodded once. May picked up her bag. There are going to be questions about tonight, about the mountain, about how 8 members of a motorcycle club came to be in possession of evidence from a federal trafficking investigation. She looked at him. I need you to trust that I can answer those questions in a way that accounts for what actually happened here, rather than the most convenient version of it. And if you can't, then the conversation about what I can't do will happen with people who know what you did tonight and why. She held his gaze. I've been watching the Iron Wardens for 4 months, Deacon. Not officially, on my own time. Because Reeves told me who you were and I wanted to know if what he said was accurate. She paused. It was accurate. She left. The diner door closed behind her. The sun came up the way it came up in November. Not dramatically, not with warmth, just a slow, reluctant lightening of the sky that moved from black to the specific gray-blue of early winter morning, the color of cold made visible. The diner's windows caught it at 5:40, and the light came through in long, low strips across the tables and the floor and the counter. And the broken neon sign outside stopped being visible as a sign and became instead just a shape, ordinary in the daylight, stripped of its buzzing nighttime presence. Terry made fresh coffee. The new pot was not substantially better than the old pot, but it was hot, and it was now, and those were the relevant variables. She moved around the counter with the efficiency of a woman who had been on her feet since before midnight, and had decided that the appropriate response to exhaustion was to be useful rather than to stop. And she refilled cups without being asked, and brought food, eggs, toast, the practical things, and set them on the tables without ceremony. Lily came out of the kitchen at 5:50 and climbed into the booth across from Priest, who was on his 4th cup and staring at the table. And she put Milo on the table between them and looked at him with the patient assessment that she brought to everyone. Priest looked at the rabbit, then at her. How old is he? 3 Christmases, Lily said. He's been through a lot. Yes. She looked at Priest's face, at the lines in it, the particular topography of a man who had been carrying something heavy for long enough that the weight had become architectural. You have a sad face, she said. Not unkindly, just observationally. Priest looked at her for a moment. I've been told. Is it because of tonight? Some of it. What's the other part? Priest was quiet. He looked at the coffee cup, then back at her, and the quality of the look was something he did not often turn on anyone, the actual look, without the managed surface. I lost someone, he said, a long time ago. Tonight reminded me of it. Lily considered this. She picked up Milo, turned him over in her hands once, the way she did when she was thinking. Then she set him back down, between them, on Priest's side of the table. You can hold him, she said. He's good at helping with that. Priest looked at the rabbit. He picked it up. He held it in his large hands, hands that had done things in the last 6 hours that the rabbit's original owner could not have imagined, and that he himself would be metabolizing for a long time. And something happened in his face that was not resolution and was not healing, which were both too large and too final for what this was. It was something smaller and more immediate. The specific interior shift of a person who has been given something they did not know they needed and are registering the shape of it. He set the rabbit back down on Lily's side of the table. "Thank you," he said. Lily nodded, picked Milo up, held him against her chest, and looked out the window at the gray morning. At 6:15, Deacon sat in the far booth with his back to the wall, and Terry across from him with her hands around her cup, and the diner quiet around them, the others variously still, variously sleeping, Hutch with his head on his folded arms, and Saber with his legs in the aisle, and Wire finally not staring at nothing but at something, at Lily, in the next booth over, who had fallen asleep again with Milo tucked under her chin. "Her mother," Deacon said. Terry looked at him. "I reached out to the county's missing persons desk at 3 a.m. Anonymous. Just the girl's name and that she was safe and located." She paused. "They'll have contacted the mother by now." "How long until she gets here?" "She's in Macon. 4 hours, maybe a little more." Terry looked at her cup. "She's been looking for 11 days. She hasn't stopped." She paused. "The desk officer told me, when I called just before 4, he said the notification call to the mother lasted about 30 seconds before she stopped being able to respond coherently." She looked up. "He said she kept saying she's safe over and over, like she was making sure it was real." Deacon looked at the sleeping child in the next booth. The gray morning light was on her face. The nightgown was wrinkled, and the apron blanket had slipped, and one hand was curled around Milo in the loose grip of deep sleep. Her feet, bare, she had refused socks, were tucked under her, and the soles of them still carried the marks of the parking lot. The frozen ground of a November night she had walked through barefoot because she had somewhere to be, and nothing was going to stop her from getting there. He looked at the soles of her feet. He looked at the window and the gray November morning beyond it. He thought about Cross in the lot, and about Kane on a mountain road, and about Reeves on the storage room floor with Rook's field dressing pressed against his side, and about 41 names on a list that was now in 3 separate locations outside the control of the man whose name was among them. He thought about Sophie standing between the stall door and the smaller children with her shoulders back. He thought about the boy who had gripped Rook's cuts with both fists and pressed his face into Rook's neck and made no sound at all. He thought about what Reeves had said in the storage room about the Iron Wardens. 6 months of watching. The careful word, accurate. He thought about what it meant to be the thing the world feared and the thing a 5-year-old ran toward in the same instant, and how those two things were not contradictions, and how it had taken him 41 years to understand why. Terry was watching him. "You should get the ribs looked at," she said. "I know. Today. I know." He picked up the coffee cup. The coffee was bad and hot, and the best thing he had tasted in several hours. He drank it. "Thank you," he said, "for calling May, for the thing with Lily, for—" He stopped. The word everything was not adequate, and he was too tired to find a better one. "Don't," Terry said, not unkindly. "It's the same reason you went up that mountain. Some things you do because you can, and because it would be unbearable not to." He looked at her. He nodded. They sat in the gray morning light and drank the bad coffee and let the silence be what it was, which was not emptiness, but the texture of a long night ending. Lily's mother arrived at 9:43 in the morning. She was 34 years old and had been driving since 4 a.m., and it was in every part of her, the way she parked, crooked, not fully in the space, the way she came through the diner door at a pace that was not quite running because her legs were not entirely reliable, the way her eyes went immediately to the booth where Lily was, not asleep anymore, but awake, sitting up, Milo in her arms, watching the door. She crossed the diner in 5 steps. What happened then was private, not in the sense that it was hidden. There were 8 bikers and 1 waitress in the room, and none of them looked away because this was the thing they had gone up the mountain for and come off the mountain carrying and held through the night against everything that had tried to prevent it from happening, and it deserved to be witnessed. But it was private in the sense that the world around it had the grace to go quiet, the way the world sometimes went quiet at the moments that mattered most. The sounds of the diner dropping out, The gray morning light steady in the windows, the broken neon sign dark and still. Lily made a sound that she had not made at any point in the 11 days. Not in the warehouse, not in the parking lot, not in the kitchen, behind the prep table. It was small and immediate, and it was the sound of a child who has been holding herself together through will and instinct, and the specific courage of the very young, finally finding the place where she was allowed to stop. Her mother did not say anything for a long time. She held Lily against her chest, and her face was pressed into Lily's hair, and her shoulders were moving in the way that shoulders moved when the body was processing something too large for it to process silently. Deacon stood at the counter. He did not go to them. This was not his moment, and he knew it, and the knowing was entirely right. He stood at the counter with his cup and watched, and what he felt watching it was not the absence of something, not the grief of a man who had protected a child and then returned her to the world from which the world had taken her. What he felt was the specific fullness of a completed thing, the weight of a promise kept, the sensation of something that had been held finally being put down, cleanly, in the right place. Lily's mother looked up from her daughter's hair. She looked across the diner at the men in leather jackets and road-scarred faces and boots on worn linoleum. She looked at Deacon. Her face had everything in it that the night had contained, and she put none of it into words. And he was grateful for that, because words would have been smaller than what this was. She nodded once. He nodded back. They left at 10:15. 8 bikes started in the parking lot of the Last Mile Diner one by one in the cold November morning, and the sound of them was the sound that Deacon had lived inside for 9 years. The specific voice of 8 Harleys idling, not the aggressive declaration of engines at speed, but the low collective rumble of machines at rest, patient and large and present. Lily and her mother were still inside. They would be for a while. There were people coming, family, and eventually the official people with their official questions, and all of the large necessary machinery of returning a child to the world. It would take time, and it would be hard in the way that things were hard when the hardest part was over, but the aftermath remained. But Lily's mother had her arms around her daughter, and the diner was warm, and Terry would not leave them. It was enough. Deacon settled onto his bike. He put his hands on the grips and felt the engine's vibration come up through the frame and into his palms, and the familiar ache of the left hand, the ribs, the shoulder, arrived with it. The full inventory of the night presented now that the necessity had cleared. He would deal with it. Later, at the clinic that Gavel's regular doctor ran and that kept odd hours without odd questions. The ribs were cracked, not broken. The shoulder would heal. The wrist was a bone bruise and would be purple by tomorrow and functional within a week. He looked at the diner's door. Through the window, he could see Lily on the booth seat. She was looking out at the parking lot, at the bikes, at him. She had Milo tucked against her chest, and she was watching him with the patient, thorough attention that had been his. From the moment she walked across the diner floor to him at 11:43 the previous night and looked at him out of all the people in the room, he raised his right hand, a small motion, not a wave, something quieter than that. An acknowledgement, a signal that passed between two people who had been through a specific particular thing together and understood each other's language at least that much. Lily raised her hand, held it flat against the window glass. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at the road. Route 9 was visible from the lot, the long straightaway of it running south through the November morning, the trees on either side bare and dark, and the road itself gray and clear and extending for as far as he could see before it curved and disappeared into the distance. The broken neon sign above the diner hummed its electrical short, buzzing and flickering even in the daylight. The old, faithful malfunction of a thing that should have been fixed years ago and had instead become simply part of what the Last Mile Diner was. Priest pulled up beside him, sat on his bike in the cold morning. "Reeves is at the county hospital," he said. "Stable. May has people with him. Kane. May has him too. Protective custody, she called it. He's cooperating." Priest paused. "Cross." Deacon looked at the road. "Clean district, clean office. He cooperates fully. His daughter gets what she needs." He paused. "Whatever comes from that, it comes from that." Priest was quiet. "You could have burned him down." "I know." "He earned it." "He did. Deacon's hands were on the grips, and the engine was running, and the road was there waiting the way roads waited, without opinion, without judgment. He also spent 6 years riding with us. He also has a daughter who needs him to exist. He looked at Priest. I'm not interested in burning. I'm interested in what actually gets better. Priest looked at him for a long moment, then he looked at the road. Where do we go? Home, Deacon said. We sleep. We let Gavel get the wrist x-rayed. We let the people who are supposed to carry the next part of this carry it. He paused. And tomorrow, or the day after, when the ribs are workable, we ride. Where? Anywhere. He looked at the road. Nowhere specific, just the road. Priest nodded. A small motion. The motion of a man for whom just the road contained a theology that didn't require naming. Wire pulled up. Gavel. Hutch, with one eye closed against the morning light. Saber. Rook, who had arrived 20 minutes ago from the garage and had said nothing to anyone but had taken his place in the lot without needing to be asked. 8 bikes in the parking lot of the Last Mile Diner at 10:15 on a Wednesday morning in November, their engines running in the cold, their exhaust clouding white and rising and dispersing in the still air. Deacon reached into his inside pocket. He took out the photograph, the federal prosecutor, the name above the operational records, the face that had appeared at a veteran's ceremony 8 months ago, and shaken his hand and said words about sacrifice. He looked at it one more time, then he folded it and put it back. It belonged to the case now, to May and Reeves and the clean office in the clean district. It was not his to carry. He had carried it as far as it needed to go, and now it was in the right hands, and he could put it down. He put it down. He pulled out of the lot. The others followed. Route 9 received them the way it had always received them, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, the road simply there and the bikes simply on it, and the cold morning air simply moving against them as they moved through it. Deacon opened the throttle gradually, not to speed, but to the particular rhythm of a long ride finding its pace. The sustained note of an engine at road speed, the wind, the bare November trees moving past on both sides, the sky gray and high and immense above the tree line. Behind him, 8 riders, 7 of them, and one who would not be riding with them again, and the shape of that absence was real and present, and would remain present for a long time, because 6 years was not nothing, and the fact that it had been built on something terrible did not retroactively cancel what had been real in it, and grief for the real parts of a broken thing was not weakness, but accuracy. He let the grief be accurate. He let it ride with him, in the space between the wind and the engine and the cold gray road, in the place where things lived when they had been processed enough to be present without being disabling. He had learned to do this, to carry things without being carried by them, to move forward with the weight rather than despite it. It was not a skill he had developed by choice. It was a skill that life had required of him and that he had acquired because the alternative was to stop, and stopping had never been acceptable. The diner disappeared in his mirrors. The road ahead curved, and the curve revealed another straight, and the straight ran toward the place where the sky came down to meet the hills. Gray meeting gray, the world reduced to its essential elements: road, sky, cold, motion. Deacon Road. In the booth of the Last Mile Diner, at the window, a 5-year-old girl watched the last taillight disappear around the curve. She had Milo against her chest and her mother's arm around her shoulders and her other hand flat on the cold window glass. She stayed at the window for a moment after the bikes were gone. Then she turned away from the glass and looked at her mother, and her mother was there, present and whole and real, and that was the thing, the only thing, that mattered. She tucked Milo under her arm. On the table behind her, on the back of a paper placemat, there was a drawing she had done in the last hour of the night. Not a map this time, not a face. 8 motorcycles on a road, stick figure riders in leather vests. And at the front, the largest figure, his arm extended not in aggression, but in the specific gesture she had seen from the window. The small raised hand of a man saying, without language, that something was finished and something else was not. That the road continued and the people on it continued. That the night had been long and the morning had come, and they were still here, still moving, still exactly what they had always been beneath the leather and the scars and the noise of their engines in the cold. Beneath the drawing, in the careful handwriting of an almost 6-year-old, 3 words. They came back.